Welcome back to On the Move at Yahoo Finance. We are watching stocks closely after we got that emergency Fed cut of 50 basis points. Right now, you can see all three major indices in the red. The Dow has been right around down 350 points for a few minutes here. About an hour ago, we were seeing a lot more whipsawing. Lee, I want to turn to you because we also are on Super Tuesday right now.
We are.
Would have been a lot more of the discussion today if not for the Fed cut. What do you expect to see today, not only after everyone gets their votes in, but in terms of market response this week after what happens today?
So I think what we're going to end up seeing is Biden having a very strong night. Now, I expected to come in today saying all of my analysis, like it's going to be Sanders big. And I think what happened with Mayor Pete, with Amy Klobuchar coming over to his side, I think that's really firming up the moderate. Now, does that mean that everybody that was for Mayor Pete and that was for Amy Klobuchar is going to go to Biden? Certainly not. I think some people might go to Bloomberg, some people might go to Warren. But when you talk to voters and when you listen to what they're saying, a lot of them at the end of the day are making a decision based on who they think is going to win. Ultimately, that's what this is about. You can listen to lots of interviews with voters, and that's what you end up hearing. Now, my other question is, does this actually energize Bernie Sanders voters? Does this get them so fired up to feel the establishment is working against us, they're coming together, they're coalescing against us, and now we're going to be fired up and we're going to show up in droves? Because historically, younger voters don't show up at the primaries, and that's what Bernie Sanders' base is. So it could surprise us, but when I look at the numbers, Bernie Sanders' lead, he was only 5 points ahead in Texas. He was 4 points ahead in Massachusetts. He's a few points ahead in a lot of states. These combinations are going to give, I think, Biden what he needs.
Can I just ask you, by the way, I want to bring you in, Oliver, in a second, but can I just ask you, why have none of these people gone over to Warren? Why did Warren's campaign kind of implode over the last few weeks? What happened there? Because, politics aside, she has not really wavered in any of her talking points and her performances in the debates, and the energy just hasn't been there.
So Elizabeth Warren, I think, is much more like a Bernie Sanders candidate than she is a moderate. A lot of people look at her policies very similar to Bernie Sanders, and so if you're moderate, you're likely not to go to Elizabeth Warren. The other thing about Elizabeth Warren that I think she suffers from is I see nothing kills a message faster than contradiction. And she did a lot of things. She did some really hard punches to say to Mayor Pete about, having fundraisers and wine cellars. Then you find out she had a fundraiser at a winery. And so there's a lot of things that make her not trustworthy to people, whether you agree with it or not. That seems to be what people felt. They felt like they knew what they were getting with Bernie Sanders, and they're looking to somebody else besides her. She does have a solid support, and she did a pretty good job taking down Bloomberg.
Well, so look, at the end of today, we're going to know whether Sanders had a big night or Biden had a big night, which means that tomorrow all the political pundits and market pundits are going to come out and start projecting their own political views onto what's going to happen with the market for the rest of the year. I caution investors this much. Don't allow that to influence your investment decisions. Don't allow that, right? When people say, if Sanders gets into the White House, it's going to be a disaster. They're projecting their own political views. They're not talking about facts because there are no facts. And let's not forget, 3 years ago, when people were saying the same thing about Donald Trump. They're saying if Donald Trump gets elected, it's going to be a complete disaster. And whether you agree or disagree, like or dislike him, at the end of the day, for the past 3 years, the markets have rallied significantly and the economy has done pretty well. And he does get some credit for that.
And if I could just bring this full circle, it seems like the headlines that people thought were going to dominate 2020, for markets at least, have not been the headlines that we thought at all. The Federal Reserve was out of play. The coronavirus is something we had not been aware of. People were thinking that if Bernie Sanders was going to emerge as the leading candidate, you would see markets selling off maybe as dramatically as we saw last week. It definitely has not been the case. So although in some pharmaceutical stocks, you're still watching some movements based on the political
But that's policy driven.
That's policy driven, right. I think at the macro scale, as you mentioned, Oliver, it's really other factors at play.
Well, but at the end of the day, then, if we see coronavirus having a more lasting effect, forget about all of these other things about who you most closely align with policy-wise. If we see a recession, that changes the whole ballgame for the election.
It does change the whole ballgame. And I think the question then becomes does it become a question about public health, or does it become a conversation about the mishandling of this whole coronavirus by Donald Trump?
Well, but can he push it off on his vice president?
He very well could. I mean, anything is possible at this point. We don't know exactly how this is going to play out. If this becomes a conversation about health, I think then Donald Trump can have a very good argument saying we don't want to necessarily make this a government option in healthcare. That's really, really scary to folks. And he can then own that debate. If this becomes a mishandling of the coronavirus, then it's going to be very, very hard for Donald Trump to win. Again, it all depends who the candidate is. It's really hard to imagine right now. Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump is a very different conversation than Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. And by the way, Joe Biden, even if he has a certain victory tonight, he's not going to be an easy candidate. He is a very, very difficult candidate. He has had a lot of gaffes. There's a lot of reasons why people thought his candidacy was dead, and it isn't just because things were so wrong. He's made a lot of missteps.